Good afternoon. Today is the 10th of October, 2017. This is Paul Glumaz. I'm an activist with the Seattle chapter of the International LaRouche movement. And this is being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. Well, there's a lot going on. And what I'm going to ask people to do today is take a step back from the fray, from the give and take, and look at what is unfolding, and look at it from the standpoint of the changes that have occurred since Vladimir Putin went to the United Nations and gave a speech on September 28th, 2015, which is approximately 2 years ago. Look at how the world has shifted in those 2 years. It's spectacular. Earlier, about a year earlier, a little more than a year earlier, the president of China in Kazakhstan announced China's policy for the One Belt, One Road, now currently called the Belt and Road Initiative, which was originally the LaRouche policy. So, beginning with the Belt and Road, and then Putin's announcement at the United Nations, you have the convergence and the creation of a new order, of a new global system. That new global system was announced in its economic form in August of 2014 in Kazakhstan by President Xi of China, and it was announced at the United Nations on September 28th, 2015, roughly 2 years ago. And what we see since then is a dramatic unfolding of developments. Okay. Now, in this context, I'm going to talk about the genius of Putin, the genius of Xi Jinping, the genius of LaRouche, and the misunderstood genius of our first Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton. Okay. Now, what Putin said basically at the United Nations is that the world of terrorism and proxy war had to come to an end. All nations need to respect the sovereignty of all nations. And we need to work on a community of principle between nations. And that Putin was launching a war from this standpoint against terrorism and wanted to work with whichever nations were willing to work to stop international terrorism, mainly ISIS. This was during the Obama administration. And the Obama administration was a big supporter and sponsor of ISIS, along with the British and Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and to some degree Saudi Arabia, who was also a sponsor of another group in Syria, Al-Qaeda. Now, to the Russians, to Putin, the situation in Syria was, metaphorically speaking, similar to Stalingrad. Had Stalingrad fallen to the Germans, that would have been the beginning of the end of Russia. It was a turning point battle in the World War II. From the standpoint of Russia, Syria was the turning point battle in this global proxy war against Russia and against China and against nations being run by those who are promoting what a lot of people out there call the New World Order, or the New World Disorder. Disorder to destroy nations so that a New World Order could be implemented. That is nationless, where nations are essentially no longer sovereign. Now, so what Putin did not long after the United Nations speech is deploy to Syria and integrate the relatively small but effective Russian air capability with the on-the-ground Syrian Defense Forces and their allied Hezbollah and the Iran Revolutionary Guards. So, and then they began to defeat ISIS. Now you have to understand, ISIS was very close to taking over, and along with Al Qaeda, they were very close to taking over. Sometimes some people call it Al Nusra, and this would have triggered a complete disintegration of the Middle East, a massive expansion of refugees into Europe, and it would have then opened the door for these operations to then go into the belly of Russia and into the eastern areas of China, not to speak of Pakistan and Afghanistan and India. So this was a turning point. This is like Stalingrad from a metaphorical sense. But Russia wasn't acting from the standpoint of they're now going to be the new policeman on the block. Rather, they were acting from the standpoint, as Putin said, we're not here to tell Syria what it can or cannot do. We're not here to tell anybody what they can or cannot do. We're here to find out what it is that's in your interest, and we want to work for your interest. We're here to find out from you what it is you need, what it is that will work. Now, after this intervention by Russia, and also following before that the shift in against the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, you had a situation where Turkey, which the Obama administration had personally organized to be the top dog in that area, began to have cold feet. And Putin was diplomatically organizing the Turks to understand that the policy that the Turks have been involved in of supporting ISIS, of supporting, and with the idea of the prospect of taking over the oil in Syria and becoming the most powerful, dominant figure in the area, and they were working with Israel on this, that policy wasn't going to work, and that Turkey needed to have a different policy. And the Russians also made it very clear that they can't trust the U.S. or the British or the Saudis or the Israelis, because Turkey has a real problem ethnically with the Kurds, and that no sooner would Turkey be in this position than the Kurd card would be played, and Turkey would be in a crisis. So later on, in the middle of all this, a Russian jet was downed by Turkish air defense, and this, according to Erdogan, and I don't trust what he says, said he did not give the order for this. That this came from within his own military. And meanwhile, there's negotiations going on in the middle of all these developments with Russia, which had cut off as a result of the downing of the airplane. Have gotten very tough with Turkey. As a result of that, the fact that Turkey was considering working with Russia, there was an attempted coup on Erdogan, which failed. It almost succeeded. But Erdogan was tipped off in time and was able to get to his cell phone and mobilize the imams in the mosques to call out the population, because they had no control over the airwaves. And the Western media was already reporting that the coup had been successful and Erdogan was looking for asylum and all this other stuff they were already saying. Well, it turns out the coup was run from the United States, from the NATO element within the Turkish military. Now, the Turkish military has run coups against other Turkish leaders in the past. The Turkish military has always been an independent power in Turkey. And this independent power was then used to go after Erdogan. And it failed. And what Erdogan did, besides kicking the U.S. out of Turkey, what Erdogan did is to end the independence of the military. Up until then, the top brass in the military decided who got promoted up the ranks, which officers got promoted. And it's those officers who then became the successors to the chief, the commanding chiefs of the Turkish military. That has all been put under civilian control, under the control of the presidency. No officer gets a significant advancement without an approval from the uh, from the uh, um, from the civilian authority. This is huge. This is a revolutionary change in the Turkish institutional structure. The other thing that Erdogan did, he won a referendum to transform the form of government from a parliamentary system to a presidential system. So now the president is not the figurehead. The president has power. And in that context, at the same time this was going on, Russia brought Turkey into a process with Iran. Now Iran is a Shia nation. Turkey is a Sunni nation. The whole idea of all the wars in Iraq and everything was to create a civil war between Shias and Sunnis. This is the thing that the Saudis were supporting, was a civil war throughout the whole region between Sunnis and Shias. It should be noted that the Syrian army is Sunni, and it's fighting alongside Iranian and Hezbollah, which is Shia. And what does that mean? That means that Syria was the last secular stronghold where you didn't have this war going on. But now, the leading Shia power, Iran, with one of the leading Sunni powers, is coming together by Russia in deliberations on the future of Syria. And they set up something called the Astana process. And Astana is the capital of Kazakhstan. And this Astana process has been going on. The United States has been invited to oversee that, to be an observer. Now they've included Jordan. Now, what this Astana process does is it has Iran, which has military presence in Syria, and Turkey, which to some degree also has military presence of Turkey, discuss with Russia and Syria, the sovereign nation of Syria, the future. And that these nations will guarantee whatever agreement is made. So the Turks are no longer, as far as we know, are supporting ISIS as they were before. And they were getting huge black market oil benefits from doing so. What is going on, however, is the Russians aren't cutting them out of the process. The Russians isn't doing winner loser. What the Russians are doing is trying to find a new framework in which you don't have a win or lose situation, where you're able to go to a new framework. And this is the genius of Putin. He's setting up a structure, and a structure of resolving these conflicts. But that resolution of those conflicts won't work unless there's an economic benefit to all the parties. And that economic benefit is coming from the Belt and Road Initiative, which is now well underway. It's going into its fourth year. And it's well underway. Actually, it's going into its fifth year. It's well underway. And all of these nations are looking at the future economic benefit of the development of the region, of the development of the connections to the rail, the oil, and all of that. And China hasn't played favorites. They've gone to everybody and said, okay, this is what we want to do. This is going to help you. We've even gotten to the point where Hamas and Al-Fatah, the two opposing Palestinian organizations, one Fatah, the West Bank, the other Hamas, the Gaza, are actually coming together around a development policy for a Chinese development policy for Palestine. So Putin is going to Israel and telling the Israelis, okay, this is a better deal for you than permanent war in the Middle East. He's going to the Saudis saying, look, your plan has failed. Your program of supporting the overthrow of Assad, of supporting ISIS, supporting al-Nusra, supporting all of this with the United States has failed. He's also going to the United States saying that this policy is terrible, this policy has failed. We need to work together for stability in the region. And of course, Trump seems to be somewhat supportive of that. But the current military element that was put in by Obama at the end, led by Dunford and others, they don't seem to be supportive of this at all. I think Dempsey the earlier chief of staff would probably have been more supportive. But anyhow, so this is the process that's going on. Russia is organizing these nations not to lose a war, but to bring them into a new architecture, between nations in the region, which will allow for the development of the region. This is very LaRouchian. This is, in essence, what LaRouche proposed in the late 70s, which was the Oasis Plan for the Middle East. The development of the Middle East is the basis for bringing these nations together. And that's what's going on. Now, the latest development in this is that the king of Saudi Arabia has gone to Russia, and the Russians have agreed to sell their 400 S-400 air defense systems to Saudi Arabia. And of course, that's the way the Saudis let you know that they are considering working with you. So this fact that the Saudis are now shifting, and there are reports that the Saudis have now come to the conclusion that their policies have failed, that they're going to have to look for other options. The fact that there are other options there is very, very important. Because, you see, the problem is when an imperial system collapses, it causes chaos. Because why? At the core of the empire, you have the British elite. You have the City of London. And then you have, by extension, Wall Street. And at the core of the empire, you have the auxiliaries, the cultivated agents, the cultivated networks for centuries, for 100 years in many cases. These are networks. And these networks are deployed. And they're not really the empire, they are the auxiliaries of the empire. The Zionist lobby is an auxiliary of the empire. The Israeli lobby is an auxiliary of the empire. They work within the empire. The empire is what provides them with their relationship to the goods that they're going to get out of the empire. The Saudis are an auxiliary of the empire. Best example is the Al-Yamama deal, and the deal that were worked out in '85, where the British BAE created a slush fund for global terror. And then in Europe, you have all the different networks are auxiliaries of this empire. And then you have the fascists in Ukraine, who are auxiliaries of this empire. And you have all of the anti-communist freaks that left over who supported Hitler in the World War, and all of their descendants are auxiliaries of the empire. And then in the U.S., you have similar auxiliaries. You have the neocons, who are auxiliaries of the empire. You also have the neoliberals, auxiliaries of the empire. So you also have the postmodernists, Antifa, and the resistance, and the Obama crowd, which is also an auxiliary of the empire. All these auxiliaries are being deployed with one idea in mind, and that is to preserve the empire. And what is the empire facing right now is an end to its existence. The end is coming from the coming collapse of the financial system, but that wouldn't be a problem if the financial collapse wiped out everybody. But the end is also coming from the emergence of a new system to replace the empire. And that new system is this global respect for nations and the economic development that the One Belt, One Road is taking shape. Now, Putin is a genius because no one expected that he would have this capability. He was set up, provoked in Ukraine to come in to protect the Russian population that was being brutalized by the Kiev Nazis, and he didn't. Instead, Crimea basically left Ukraine. They were never really part of Ukraine. But Russia did not get bogged down militarily in Ukraine. And now you have a mess in Ukraine. But Putin has been able to present a vision of a world, and he's been able to use in a very judicious way the military capabilities of Russia in Ukraine, creating a situation where if the U.S. wanted to stop Russia, they would have to go to war with Russia. Now, that's not to say that the Russians wouldn't be defeated by U.S. forces, but it would not be cheap. It would not be war on the cheap. So essentially, they've used that as a leverage to begin to systematically bring that whole region into a new geometry, a new architecture. That's genius. Okay. Now, the genius of Xi Jinping, the president of China, is that he has done something no Chinese leader has ever done. He's taken China, which is generally a very, the Chinese generally have a very parochial view. You know, what goes on outside of China, outside of where Chinese are, is really none of their business. And what he's done is he's laid out the following in the Belt and Road. We're not going to be able to develop China unless we develop the rest of the world. Therefore, we, the Chinese, and our Chinese civilization have to step it up and be not a global power, but be the driver for global economic development, for bringing the world out of poverty, because we can't really do it for ourselves without it being done in the context. Because where are we going to get our resources? Where are we going to get everything? We have to develop the world. That's very that's very novel for a Chinese leader to do. So it's very daring. And the other thing is that the Chinese are now committed to this, and they have to now go all over the world and get all these countries on board and be participating in this, including the United States. They really are in a position of vulnerability. So they have to make it work. So they now have to act. So they now have to diplomatically become involved with every part of the world. This has never been done by the Chinese before, especially in the recent period. And this is a courageous thing to do. Internally, Xi Jinping has had to crack down very hard on the forces within the Communist Party, who don't necessarily share that view, who generally have don't have this vision of a future. In fact, most Chinese have not had this vision coming out of Mao and coming out of the development of China. And Xi Jinping is giving them a vision. He's giving them a civilizational vision that they are Chinese, but that they have a global responsibility for the human species as a whole. This is very radical. This has never been done before. And that takes genius. Okay, so now, if you go back to what I was saying about Putin, the reason you have this complete freak out about Russia is twofold. One, what Russia did, no one expected to do. The people around Obama, the neocons, Hillary Clinton, expected to fulfill the promise of breaking up Russia and China. They didn't see that Putin understood the system. Putin understood the British. He knew how to outflank them. They didn't understand that he didn't fall for any of the traps. And they didn't understand, and now they're very bitter. They don't blame Trump for his election. They blame Putin for Trump's election. Not because Russia intervened into the U.S. election. Russia did not intervene into the U.S. election. What Russia did was intervene into the international situation, into Syria, into the Middle East, and has wrecked all the plans. And the wrecking of all those plans of the neocons and the New World Order crowd has created a situation in the U.S. population where the U.S. population now was also rejecting the same thing. So the European population and the U.S. population are increasingly rejecting all of this. So this is the genius of Putin. So it was the processes unleashed by China and Putin that actually created the circumstances internationally, which were reflected in Europe and reflected in the U.S. And that's why that's why Trump got elected. He didn't get elected because of the Russian involvement. He got elected because the world situation had changed. And so they blame Russia for that change. And they blame China too. So those are the two geniuses. And I was going to go through Alexander Hamilton, the genius of Alexander, and LaRouche, but I'm running out of time right now. So I'll go to that next time. But the main thing right now is to understand that Donald Trump will be going to Asia in 3 weeks. He'll be going to Japan, South Korea, China, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And everything is being run against Trump right now to wreck his ability to go there and to wreck his ability to function. They're trying to box him in. The British press is now openly calling for a nuclear war with North Korea by the United States in the Daily Mail. So this is we're coming to the end. But I want people to understand what genius really is on this level. And next time we'll focus on the genius of LaRouche and Hamilton.